So, welcome to the 10th session of the ECPS virtual workshop series, We, the People and the Future of Democracy, Interdisciplinary Approaches. This online series follows the ECPS in-person conference at Oxford University on July 1st, 2025, and continues the vital discussions initiated there. My name is Reka Koleszar. I'm a program assistant at ECPS and currently a PhD student at National Chengchi University in Taipei, Taiwan. ECPS curates this virtual workshop series to address one of the most pressing questions of our time: how the idea of the people shapes the fate of democracy. By examining how the people can serve as both sword and shield, namely a democratic force and a tool of authoritarian consolidation, this series fosters interdisciplinary dialogue to better understand democratic backsliding, resilience, and the future of democracy worldwide. Today's session, Resisting the Decline: Democratic Resilience in Authoritarian Times, shifts the analytical lens from democratic erosion to the diverse practices through which democratic life is sustained, reimagined, and contested under conditions of authoritarian pressure. Bringing together interdisciplinary perspectives, the panel examines resilience not as a fixed institutional capacity, but as an emergent, often ambivalent process shaped by markets, local governance, civil society, gender politics, and transnational activism. Across cases ranging from Western democracies to conflict-affected regions in the Middle East, the papers explore how democratic norms endure through contradiction. As professionalization deepens political distance, as feminist and grassroots movements confront repression from exile, and as radical democratic experiments persist amid war and abandonment. Collectively, the session interrogates whether resilience reinforces existing hierarchies or opens space for democratic renewal, and what resisting democratic decline truly entails in an era marked by polarization, authoritarianism, and global uncertainty. As a testament to its commitment to knowledge dissemination, ECPS is going to write a workshop report and share the video recording of this event on its website and YouTube channel. And with this, I will introduce the distinguished moderator, presenters, and discussants for today's session. Today's workshop is going to be moderated by Dr. Amadeo Variale. Dr. Variale earned his PhD from the University of East London. His research interests focus on contemporary populism and nationalism. During his academic career, Dr. Variale contributed as a research assistant to the development of a significant textbook project on the global resurgence of nationalism, titled The New Nationalism in America and Beyond. He has written for ECPS extensively, and currently he is also an affiliated researcher for the Center for the Study of Global Nationalism. Our first speaker today will be Dr. Peter Rogers to discuss resilient in market democracy. Dr. Rogers is a senior lecturer in sociology at Macquarie University. He previously served as a co-director of climate futures at Macquarie University. Dr. Rogers' primary research interest focuses on resilience, surveillance, social order, and mechanisms of control. Our second speaker will be Dr. Pierre Camus, presenting a paper titled The Contradictory Challenges of Training Local Elected Officials for the Future of Democracy. Dr. Camus is a postdoctoral fellow at Nantes University. He holds a doctorate in sociology from the University of Nantes, and he is also a co-president of the National Observatory for the Training of Local Elected Officials. The third presentation of today's panel will be delivered by Dr. Sohaila Shariari on the topic The Rise of Women-Led Radical Democracy in Rojava, Global Democratic Decline and Civil Society Resilience Amidst Middle Eastern Authoritarianism. Dr. Shariari holds a doctorate in political science and 2 master degrees, one in sociology from Tehran University in Iran and another in political sociology from Sorbonne University in Paris. The fourth and last presentation today will be delivered by Etienne Nezliuchev. She is a PhD candidate at the Institute of Sociological Studies, Charles University in Prague. She holds a Master of Science in Sociology and Gender Studies from Lund University, Sweden, and teaches both master and bachelor level courses at Charles University. She has been a doctoral fellow at the University of Vienna and Scuola Normale Superiore, Italy. Following the presentations, our discussants, Dr. Gwenele Boua and Dr. Gabriel Bayari Toscano, will each offer 12 minutes of commentary and feedback. Dr. Gwenal Abawa is a sociologist and researcher at the University of Helsinki, and her work focuses on the discursive and digital dimensions of right-wing populism, far-right and extremist movements, conspiracy theories, counter-media, and post-truth politics. She's currently contributing to the EU-funded Horizon Europe project, Arenas, which analyzes the evolution and societal impact of extremist narratives across Europe. Dr. Gabriele Baiari Toscano is an assistant professor in the Department of Audiovisual Communication at the Rey Juan Carlos University. He is an interdisciplinary researcher working at the intersection of communication and social sciences. His research focuses on the far-right and current polarized discourses in the public sphere, and in recent years he has worked in European and Latin American contexts. As a reminder, we will have a Q&A session after the completion of the presentations and the feedback from the discussants and a brief response from the presenters. The participants can write their questions in the chat box or raise their virtual hand and pose their questions in person. And with this, I give the floor to Dr. Variele.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It is both a pleasure and an honor to serve as chair today for the European Center for Populism Studies. As you already know, the session 10 of the virtual workshop series is titled Resisting the Decline, Democratic Resilience in Authoritarian Times. This leads me to postulate that we are living in an era of significant geopolitical, socioeconomic, and sociocultural changes, accompanied by what the Dutch political scientist Cas Mudde has described as a populist zeitgeist, a populist mood, or a populist moment in history. It appears that the rise of authoritarianism in this multipolar setting goes hand in hand with contemporary populism. And part of the reason why we speak of authoritarianism is because ascending populist actors, mostly in Europe, Asia, and the Americas, are to a great extent challenging the liberal constitutional aspects of democracy, as we've known it from the post-war settlement onwards. What is interesting and worrying to many is that while authoritarian regimes are thriving in areas of the world where democracy, as conceived, at least in the liberal Western sense, has not taken deep institutional roots, such as China and Russia, authoritarianism has also re-emerged as a spectre in countries that have enjoyed consolidated democracies for some time, notably the United States. In the latter case, rather than taking the form of outright regime authoritarianism, it manifests under the guise of populism or as a forma mentis, a mindset among segments of the electorate and political representatives. Specifically, the rule of law and both individual and minority rights are occasionally threatened by actors who would normally be located on the fringes of the political spectrum, but that are now being increasingly mainstreamed and normalized. In order to resist an authoritarianism on a large scale, it is essential to strengthen democratic resilience, and this can only be done by defending institutions, constitutional norms, and civic participation, by re-inspiring disillusioned and passive voters against authoritarian pressure. In an authoritarian era, democracy can only survive when citizens, leaders, and state systems actively participate in politics by endorsing accountability, pluralism, freedom of speech and of association, human rights, and the rule of law. That said, from what I gather by looking at the abstracts and drafts of the papers to be presented, some of these populist actors and authoritarian actors will be mentioned or analyzed today in relation to important themes, ranging from civil society to democratic resilience through activism, all the way to contemporary feminism. So I guess let us begin with the presentations. Each presenter will have 15 minutes, and unfortunately, we have to be strict with time. So as we also have a Q&A session afterwards, let us begin with Dr. Peter Rogers, whenever you're ready.
Peter Rogers just joined us.
Okay. I think he can't hear us.
Yeah, you can repeat, Variala, for your invitation.
Okay. Dr. Peter Rogers? Yes. So you can start your presentation now that I've provided the thematic assessment for today.
Hello, I'm sorry that I was a little late in joining today. The Australian time difference caught up with me, I'm afraid. But thank you for allowing me to join. Am I connected okay? Everyone can hear me?
I can hear you.
So thank you very much, and I do apologize for that slight delay in joining today. So today I'll be talking about resilience in market society. I am going to be talking at quite a broad level with some material that I'm working on for my current book. I'll try and rattle it off quite quickly for you. Thank you for bearing with me. So a few assumptions I'm making for today's talk, if you'll bear with me. Assumption one, we'll assume that we all agree we live in a market society. To me, that means market mechanisms, competition, supply, demand, and profit have expanded beyond mercantile exchange of goods and services. They've become the primary organizing principles of our social order. They're shapers of our culture, refiners of our underlying moral values, and in the end, they define the rules of the game by which we enact our lives. We might not always like it, but it is how the pragmatic tend to understand the boundaries and constraints that allow an action to be wise or unwise, profitable or not, legal or illegal. Assumption two, our market society today has become more extreme than the market economy from which it grew. Social norms, personal identities, political decisions, and legal technicalities that frame right and wrong are increasingly shaped by the logic of the market much more than by ethical, social, or community considerations. This is an order that prioritizes minimal government, free exchange, and the entrepreneurial drive of the individual. Individual freedom is, as such, intended to drive supply and demand, thus creating individual liberty through freedom of choice. Because the system was refined by a reaction against the authoritarian surges and nationalist ideologies that drove the world wars of the 20th century, it was designed to promote free choice whilst limiting the power of national governments. Liberty was to be protected from the danger posed by authoritarian state ideologies. The result was a liberty precariously balanced because markets aren't moral. They're primarily designed to be an efficient way of providing citizens with freedom of choice. So the dream of liberty is primarily of rational financial choices, not moral choices. As we've seen and we know now, if markets are left unregulated, they tend towards immoral exploitation and the centralization of wealth in a small elite. So our next assumption is that we are protected from the worst by possible outcomes of the market because the rules of market societies are balanced by the rules of the welfare state. In opposition to the optimized market model, this requires a strong government to intervene where markets are blind in the realm of collective interests. Markets aren't moral, and collective interests often require sacrifice, so welfare politics ensure that social safety nets, healthcare, pensions, and employment benefits aren't lost in the pursuit of wealth. With a contested set of institutional rules for redistribution, like taxes and courts. Ideally, this helps the collective protect against and correct when market failures driven by individual self-interest cause imbalances, the global financial crisis. Freedom's automatic balancing, yeah? So our final assumption implies that individual freedom of the market is balanced against the social equity of a nation state. These assumptions set the stage. Resilience fits into this as a traveling concept, a concept that fits into both perspectives and systems, but depending on which way we encounter it, it can mean different things. It will require different rules. An increasing number of people have begun to argue that resilience has become a shaper of the rules. But once again, this means different things depending on the encounter. So when traveling in a market society, resilience resonates well with individual liberty. The key encounter with resilience is as a trait of the individual, a characteristic that one might possess and even cultivate. To be resilient is to show properties of endurance in the face of challenges, to continue on in the face of adversity. It's something we demonstrate as an individual characteristic. Individual resilience as a member of market society has come to encompass the capacity of an individual to adapt, persevere, to maintain financial, physical, and mental well-being whilst encountering economic shocks, rapid market changes, or systemic disruptions to their freedom of choice via markets. The individual shows resilience by being proactive in foreseeing risks, hazards, or threats, and reactive when they occur to minimize any disruption caused. This relies on an individual to show personal initiative, curate strong social connections, and cultivate the ability to reorganize personal resources from consumption patterns to navigating precarious unemployment. Most significantly, the resilient citizen in market society is a self-reliant and adaptive individual, one enmeshed in the solidarity empowered by a supportive, well-connected community. They're perpetually evolving, not just returning to the state they were in before the disruption occurred, but learning from it to build future resilience at a higher capacity. This is the version of the individual the World Bank speaks to when discussing people's ability to recover from negative shocks while retaining or improving their functioning. Resilience is less talked of individually in relation to welfare state policies because the discussion tends towards the resilience not of the individual or even the collective, but of the welfare state itself. Our understandings of resilience immediately require a different approach in this encounter because when talking about an individual capacity, we have one set of measuring sticks, different things we might look for. But in the discussion of the welfare state, we're now talking about the resilience of particular practices, of legal and ethical frameworks, of technical procedures of governing. And as discussed in our assumptions, those features differ significantly depending on the welfare or market-driven approach. It's where the kind of resilience being built can require significantly different types of investment, because resilience becomes institutionalized in particular technical practices, guidelines, and principles. The type of resilience we're talking about and start to enact shapes the rules of governance. In encountering resilience in governance, the focus tends towards different mechanisms for managing risk, redistributing resources before, during, and after a sudden shock, and thus adapting the mechanisms of rule to better cope with crisis. To some extent, that can include slow stressors like inequality, but the tension between market society and the welfare state can exacerbate and even create problems. Welfare states try and build resilience by building social protections through the decommodification of essential services and investment in social infrastructure, fostering stability and trust in communities. Market societies build resilience through the creative destruction inherent to competition, through flexible efficiency if possible, safe redundancy when required, and promote individual responsibility, with the state often acting as a facilitator of market operations rather than a direct provider or supporter of the citizen. So the requirements asked of the individual citizen by each model are different. More so, they expose different moral and ethical assumptions underwriting each approach to social order, leading to significant differences in the policies pursued by those seeking to build resilience of different types. So the types of resilience strategies that emerge in community engagement, civil defense, disaster management, climate change, even international relations, create a politics of resilience more broadly. So in the discussion of resilience, it's not at all far-fetched to hear people talk of the resilience of democracy. So as many of us feel, our market-led model of liberty has perhaps gotten away from us more than we would have liked. But lest I wander too far away from ever making any point, I'll try and tie this back into the assumption from the beginning. Given our assumptions, I think it's safe to say there are different models of resilience, and they're evolving as they emerge. The resilient individual plays a significant role. Understanding moral and ethical coding of a resilient citizen helps us understand and create reasonable expectations to prepare, to plan, to adapt. It helps us understand what kind of resilience is being built into the operations of market societies and where new balances can be found where old ones are failing. And a welfare state relies on the state as a primary provider of social protection, security, and services to mitigate inequality, but the market society relies on individual responsibility, private initiative, on market forces for income maintenance, welfare, and social insurance. Both require the citizen to be strongly enmeshed in collective investments in resilience, to have active social capital and culturally reinforced networks of solidarity to be activated at a higher capacity during times of stress. The tension that one of many that we'd like to see have more study is how their different systems place different stresses on the relationships that people need to activate. People's experiences vary wildly, from surviving crisis event to long-term recovery to adaptation from lessons learned. In years of research and resilience to disasters, I've seen great examples of projects that bring people together, but I've also heard many stories from people about surviving the recovery and how that was harder than surviving the crisis. People's relationship with resilience can range from wholehearted engagement to complete rejection. But almost all agree that where market society most struggles with resilience is in funding social connectivity initiatives, which are rarely an attractive investment for the venture capital needed to scale them up more widely. Too many times, the problem isn't finding collective resilience building projects, it's making them profitable, and markets rarely provide any space for that. But again, when was the market ever providing for altruistic urges, for empathy? The bridge between individual and collective resilience is perhaps best expressed through our capacity for altruism and our difficulty in empowering it. So that would be nice to see in that as another growing area of research. The critique is awfully tempting. It frames a viable worst-case scenario for resilience as and yet another tool in the kit of rational neoliberalism, passing responsibility for the successful navigation of crisis from the state to the individual. We can see that that point of view can be very compelling. So perhaps we have time for maybe just one more assumption. Peter Bloom argues strongly that we're operating today with an altered morality of individualized ethics that makes us all personally responsible for dealing with and resolving the moral failings of the system. In doing so, individuals end up perpetuating the very market system they morally oppose and feel powerless to ultimately change. We might rightly ask if resilience is an extension of this, because in building resilience to disasters as a central focus of resilient practices, we are all made personally responsible for dealing with and adapting to the existential threat of fire, flood, famine, terror attack, and even the changing climate. But to what extent does that personal responsibility need to drive our understanding of change and of behavior? Individualized narratives drawn from psychological sciences have begun to reinforce this. And they can be quite useful in understanding how we're framing the social responsibilities of citizens. In these approaches, resilience and personal responsibility are deeply linked. They help us understand how a proactive stance on coping can help people grow from setbacks, how it empowers an individual to take ownership of their preparation for and responses to challenges. fostering self-reliance, adaptation, and growth over helplessness or reliance on others. And that's bread and butter for models of solidarity and social action. So in the context of a resilient citizen, we have to take personal responsibility on multiple levels. And that can be seen as a threat to the underlying principles of social order and democracy that rely on connectivity. We're asking a lot of resilient citizens. And we're also fundamentally trying to reshape the nature of expectations between citizen and the state in relation to the support that we receive and our own responsibility to take a hand in what it does in that name. I'll conclude with this. The rabbit hole is deep, and there are many encounters one can have with resilience. It can be a force for good or ill, depending on those encounters and on your perspective of what's required. Compromises are made in the pursuit of a more resilient world, but remain in a delicate balance between collective and individual interests to be forgotten behind the resilience of the individual, but we somehow have to try and make a balance of both. Resilience is a traveling concept, and you'll encounter it in lots of ways, but we have to keep in mind what resilience we're talking about. Is it the concept, the practice, or the eventual enactment? So all this and other encounters will be in the book that I'm currently writing, and that should be out later in the year with Edward Elgar. So I should probably leave it there, and thank you for your time and for listening to me today.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Rogers. Congratulations on your book. Let's move on to Dr. Pierre Camus.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. I will just manage my screen. Okay, and good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for to the organizers of this panel. I am not very used to presenting in English, so you can hear. So I apologize in advance for my pronunciation, and I will try to do my best. So my name is Pierre Camus. I hold a PhD in sociology from the University of Nantes in France, and my research focuses on the training of local elected officials in France, Europe, and a little bit in North America countries like Canada. And at first sight, training may appear as a technical or just an administrative issue for elected officials, but however, I will argue that it raises broader and more fundamental questions about democracy, political equality, and that the question is closely connected to the question of populism. My presentation focuses today on the French case only, which is particularly instructive. And given the 50 minutes format, I will necessarily have to summarize several points that will deserve more detailed development, but I will do as fast as I can. Indeed, France has developed a detailed legal framework that for the training of local elected officials, explicitly justified in the name of democratic accessibility and equality. The central argument I would like to make today is that training constitutes a democratic paradox in France and for other countries also. While it is officially designed to facilitate access to political office and to improve the exercise of local mandates, its empirical effects often contradict these state objectives. And I will develop two main arguments. First, I will show that training does not reduce inequalities of access to political office and may even reinforce the distance between elected official and citizen. Second, I will argue that training contributes to reproducing inequalities among elected officials themselves, particularly along territorial and gender lines. And this analysis is based on qualitative data quantitative data, provided by the Caisse des dépôts et consignations, which is institutional French state institution, covering more than 30,000 local elected officials who participate in training program between the January 2022 and December 2025, 3 years. As well as several dozen qualitative interviews conducted with elected officials since 1960. Okay, I will begin by saying that in France, training for local elected officials is legally recognized as, oh, I will turn my page, okay, is legally recognized as a right directly linked to the exercise of a political mandate. It is publicly found and justified for democratic reasons. The underlying principle is that local political office should be accessible to all citizens, regardless of their educational levels, professional backgrounds, or prior political experiences. Training is therefore presented as a way to compensate for differences in knowledge and skills, and to ensure that any citizen can effectively govern once elected. This right is structured, you can see, around two main mechanisms. The first is a local authorities are required to allocate a share of their budget to the training of elected officials. And the second, each elected official has access to an individual annual training entitlement financed through a deduction from their own allowance. From a formal perspective, this framework appears inclusive and egalitarian. It assumes that political competence can be acquired through institutional support rather than inherited through social trajectories. However, this is where the first paradox begins to appear. The first argument I would like to develop is this following. Training local elected officials does not reduce inequalities of access to political office. This is because training only concerns individuals who have already been elected. In other words, training intervenes after electoral selection. Oh, sorry. Okay. It does not help citizens gain access to political office. It just supports elected officials once they already hold a mandate. As a result, the social inequalities that structure access to election, such as education, profession, gender, social capital, and political networks, or whatever, remain largely unchanged. And more importantly, training may even reinforce the distance between elected officials and the citizen. Training organizes the transmission of a key democratic knowledge, including legal rules, public finance, urban planning, and administrative procedures, whatever, within closed institutional settings that are accessible only to the elected official. Citizens do not participate in these learning spaces. They are excluded from the environment where political competence is produced, accumulated, and legitimized. And in this sense, training contributes to transforming democratic knowledge into specialized resources reserved for the representatives only. It strengthens the idea that governing requires expertise that only elected officials can legitimately acquire. This development challenges a central element of the French Republican tradition, the figure of the elected official as an ordinary citizen, temporarily entrusted with political responsibility. And paradoxically, a device designed to strengthen democracy may contribute to reinforcing the symbolic and practical separation between the representative and the people. The second paradox concerns the inequalities within the group of elected officials themselves. Yep. Okay. Although training rights are formally equal, access to training is deeply unequal in practice. These inequalities are first territorial and institutional. Elected officials serving in large municipalities, metropolitan areas, or higher levels of local government are significantly more likely to participate in those trainings. They benefit from larger budgets, higher allowances, and greater institutional support. They are also more likely to hold their mandates full-time, to have access to political staff, and to be embodied in political parties that actively encourage training. By contrast, elected officials from small and rural municipalities face structural constraints. They often have limited financial resources, limited time availability, and fewer training providers nearby, and weaker administrative support. As a result, training tends to accelerate political professionalization for some elected officials, while others remain at the margins of institutional competence. And as you can see in this table, which comes from my PhD research conducted in the Pays de la Loire region, it shows that the average annual training rate over a 10-year period between 2008 and 2018, the training rates are relatively high among regional and departmental elected officials, while they tend toward zero in municipality with fewer than 2,000 inhabitants. And these inequalities become particularly visible when training is examined from a gender perspective. At first glance, women and men elected officials use training in a relatively similar proportion. This could suggest that training contributes to a gender equality in political careers. However, a closer examination reveals important differences in the type of training undertaken. Male elected officials are overrepresented in training related to central and strategic policy areas, such as public finance, urban planning, and public procurement and infrastructure. And as you can see, female elected officials, by contrast, are more likely to participate in training related to social policy, child care, education, culture, or social services. While these domains are essential to local government, they are also less politically valued and less associated with a position of power. And in this respect, training does not compensate for gender inequalities in political responsibility. It tends instead to stabilize existing division in the distribution of political roles. And rather than facilitating women access to strategic political positions, training may contribute to maintaining them in more subordinate and specialized roles. And to conclude, training local elected officials in France is officially presented as a tool to strengthen democracy. It is expected to facilitate access to political office and improve the exercise of local mandates. Empirically, however, these objectives are only partially achieved. Training does not reduce inequalities of access to political office, since it only concerns those who have already been elected. It reinforces the boundaries between elected officials and citizens by organizing the transmission of democratic knowledge within closed institutional spaces. And it also reproduces inequalities among elected officials themselves by favoring those who already possesses greater political, institutional, and social resources. And more broadly, the French case highlights a structural tension in contemporary democracies, because how can political systems respond to the growing complexity of public action without transforming representation into a form of professional monopoly? And how can competence be promoted without reinforcing new forms of exclusion, particularly in a context where populist discourses challenge professional expertise and political elites? This question extends beyond the French case and invite comparative reflection on the future of democracy and political equality, especially in relation to contemporary politism dynamics. Thank you for your attention, and sorry for my pronunciation.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Pierre Camus. Now it's Dr. Sohaila Shairari's turn. So whenever you're ready. Can't you hear me? Okay.
Damien?
Whenever you're ready, Dr. Shairavi.
Damien? Damien, viens. J'ai un problème ici. J'ai un problème. Viens. Vite.
Okay, so
Je peux
some
pas le...
technical problems, so
Yeah,
we'll give
she
her
has a
a
problem.
couple of minutes. We'll give
I
her a
understand
couple of
that.
minutes.
Okay. So can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah?
And see me as well?
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you so much. Sorry for the problem, yeah. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm honored to be here with you. And the title of my talk today is The Rise of Women-Led Radical Democracy in Rojava, Global Democratic Decline and Civil Society Resilience Amidst Middle Eastern Authoritarianism. So in my research, which is an article, I explored the emergence of the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, AANES, known as Rojava, as a substantive counter-hegemonic alternative to regional authoritarianism in the era marked by global democratic recession. So my research is situated in the context of the Syrian civil war, the collapse of Bashar al-Assad regime in December 2024, and the current Syrian transnational government of former Al-Qaeda jihadist Ahmed al-Shar'a, emphasizing how Rojava's model of democratic confederalism foregrounds gender equality and multi-ethnic pluralism and ecological principles. I argue that Rojava represents a rare experiment in radical democracy and participatory governance that persists despite persistent violence and geopolitical marginalization. In order to actually schematize the global recession, global democratic recession, I situated Rojava within a broader global democratic recession characterized by institutional decay and authoritarian shift. To understand Rojava, we must look at the global context. Since 2006, the world has faced a democratic recession. Scholars like Levitsky and Zibalt in their work in 2018 note a convergence of crises, hollowing out public trust and centralizing executive power. This global retreat has reshaped governance, particularly in the global south, where entrenched authoritarianism is finding new ways to consolidate. This global recession has seen liberal democracy, once considered hegemonic by someone like, for example, Fukuyama, face sustained pressure in both the global north and the global south. So there are lots of scholarly works that actually they work on this recession that I think as I will I'm not going to present all of them, but rather I will be focusing on the authoritarianism a little bit in the Middle East. When, for example, in the global picture, when we are talking about the decline of the... Sorry, everything is okay? Can I continue? Yeah.
Please go on.
Everything okay?
Yeah. So in a global picture, when we are talking about the recession of the decline of democracy, really we are talking about hollowing out the participatory life and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the Middle East, the dynamic is a little bit different. Here we are facing a consolidation of authoritarianism rather than the recession of democracy. A scholar like Hamid Bouzarslan in his work in 2021 describes this regional authoritarianism as anti-democracy, a system designed to dismantle democratic aspiration while keeping a facade of legality. For example, in Turkey, Iran, and Syria, we see the systematic constriction of civic space and the use of populist narratives to marginalize pluralism. So in this context, we have had the rise of a feminist radical democracy of Rojava since 2012, which has its ideological foundations in democratic confederalism. The Rojava project is grounded in Abdullah Öcalan's ideology of democratic confederalism, which explicitly rejects the nation state. This theory is influenced by Murray Bookchin's theory of social ecology. The model focuses on decentralized self-determination, administration, and ecological sustainability. Akaya and Jongerden in their work in 2012, and Graeber and Brinkat in 2021 described this as a rupture in regional history that challenges ethno-nationalism and patriarchy. It is a deliberate counter-model, Rojava. It is a deliberate counter-model rather than an ad hoc formation arising solely from the vacuum of a state collapse. So, women's leadership in Rojava is examined as a structural driver of democratic resilience, embedding gender equality and horizontal coordination into governance. Jongerden in his work 2019 notes that the institutionalization of women's leadership via co-chair systems transformed gender equality into foundational political principle. The Women's Protection Unit, YPG, the only woman military force in Rojava, and autonomous councils disrupt the masculinized logic of militarized resistance, as discussed by Derek in her work 2022 and Tax as well 2016. By focusing on care and horizontal coordination, Holdo in his work 2025 suggests women-led civil society function as a symbolic infrastructure of resilience. So, but we see that Rojava since 2012, it emerged on the international scene, and it was in a spotlight of international media through the Battle of Kobane and the defeat of ISIS by the combatant of the Rojava. But in this context, we see that the regional authoritarianism and the global recession of the democracy has impacted Rojava in a very, very bad manner. And even with the transnational government of transitional government of Ahmed al-Shar'a after the collapse of the Bashar al-Assad regime in December 2024, we see the same logic of the marginalization of the Rojava by the Ahmed al-Shar'a regime. In the context of Syria's post-2024 transition, Syria's post is considered in light of ongoing exclusionary state logics that undermine Rojava's autonomous governance. The fall of the Assad regime in December 2024 did not end exclusionary governance. Instead, the administration of Ahmed al-Shar'a has continued to delegitimize Rojava. The new transnational authorities frame Kurdish self-determination as a separatist threat to national unity. This narrative reproduces earlier statist logic, prioritizing elite-driven transition over negotiated autonomy and pluralism. Rojava representatives remain excluded from constitutional talks, reflecting a regional consensus against non-state democratic models. another title of my talk, Global Realpolitik and Western Silence. Western recalibration and selective engagement are evaluated as a part of a broader hollowing out of democratic commitments, reflecting geopolitical priorities over pluralist support. So this is evidenced by the European Union's agreement to a financial support package of approximately 620 million euros for 2026-2027, with the transitional government led by Ahmed al-Shar'a, despite ongoing concerns about the new authorities' origins and rights violation in the broader conflict context. The marginalization of Rojava should therefore be read not as a localized failure of post-conflict governance, but as a symptom of the global democratic recession. As democratic backsliding intensifies worldwide, political projects that exceed liberal procedural norms, particularly those grounded in radical pluralism, gender equality, and non-statist sovereignty, are increasingly rendered illegible within dominant political imaginaries. The coercive reintegration of the Kurdish autonomy in Syria, enabled by Western recalibration and international silence, reveals how contemporary democracy is being narrowed rather than defended, tolerated only when it aligns with state-centric sovereignty, security governance, and geopolitical stability. In this sense, Rojava does not merely challenge authoritarianism in the Middle East, it exposes the limit of democracy itself in an international order, increasingly hostile to experiments that seek to democratize power beyond the state. So, to conclude, Rojava stands as a diagnostic site for the contradictions of a global order that claims to value democracy while marginalizing radical plurality. Its survival reveals that popular sovereignty can be institutionalized through feminist and horizontal forms rather than exclusionary mobilization. The experiment compels a fundamental question. Can democracy be reimagined beyond the nation state and the patriarchal framework? Ultimately, Rojava illustrates that democracy is a living process capable of flourishing even under condition of extreme global recession. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Shairari. Now it's HM, PhD candidate at the Institute of Sociological Studies, Charles University. Please, you may begin your presentation.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you see my screen? I hope it's fine. Yeah, does it work? Okay, good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the organizers, and I'm very happy to be here and listening this interesting presentation. Today, I will be presenting a small part of my ongoing PhD research. First of all, I will be talking about like how do I conceptualize this research, what is it about, and the methodology of it. And share like a glimpse of a certain theoretical framework that I'm using to analyze the research field work, and then I will give some examples from the research that I conducted. So my research and today the presentation that I will present today is it's called Feminist Diaspora Activism from Poland and Turkey, Resisting Authoritarianism, Anti-Gender Politics, and Reimagining Transnational Solidarity in Exile. Since we've been talking about it, and the name of this workshop is Democratic Resilience, I wanted to start with this one of the important quotations from the Zapatismo women movement that also very much inspired the conceptual framework of this research, and how the already established systems, nation states, when they are not anymore serving a certain group of people, how we can kind of analyze and create new ways of being and new ways of creating new different kind of words in order to stay alive. And I'm analyzing from this point of view this diasporic, feminist diasporic generative resistance practices and solidarities against transnational undercharging politics from Poland and Turkey. And one of the other important things that before I start and get into deeper of this topic is that, and what is also important thing is that how people are and how activists are deciding to give themselves out of these collective imaginaries and historicities and activist identities, and how kind of we can find ways of telling better stories in terms of democratic resiliences. So the main research is actually has a comparative framework. In terms of anti-gender movements and anti-gender politics studies, the Central Eastern European region is a very well-developed research area, and there's many research, but there is the emerging scholarship in the Savannah region, and the main aim of this research is kind of bring into conversation to region together as the conceptual framework is coming from Poland and Turkey, and kind of conceptualize this transnational analysis of under-gender politics. To argue that this transnational under-gender politics needs to move beyond these nationally bounded frameworks, since anti-gender movements operate transnationally, and they share certain kind of narratives and discourse strategies. It's very important to kind of bring this to different regions, as in my case, Poland and Turkey, into conversation, and how kind of to see that how the local actors kind of they are not only passively importing this kind of transnational anti-gender politics records from other regions, but actually they are the ones that inventing this kind of transnational rhetorics. And of course, Poland and Turkey shares certain kind of similarities, but also differences in terms of the rise of populism and right-wing populism, especially. And one of the important things is that, in 2023, when the elections that has happened at the same time in Poland and Turkey, a right-wing populist party, Law and Justice government, peace government, lost power, but in Turkey, AKP, Justice and Development Party, gained power again. But in 2025, we saw that now a peace, Law and Justice backed political leader Karol Nawrocki elected as a president of Poland, and it kind of showed that these right-wing populist agendas are still continue its hegemony also in the Poland still, but also there's different aspects of religious frameworks, that as being Poland being a very Catholic country and Turkey being a secular Islamic country, and also there's differences between the EU membership that is placed on it. But one of the most important things that they share is the family-oriented policies and how they kind of shape the anti-gender politics and right-wing populist narratives. So the research is mostly combining of the post-migrant studies of feminist activists. So I especially look for the feminist activists that migrated because of this anti-gender politics and political reasons, basically to different parts of Europe. And so I conducted qualitative interviews, live history interviews about their activist identities, post-migration activist identities, but also as a second phase, the visual focus groups, with bringing both activist groups from Poland and Turkey, diaspora groups, to kind of create this visual focus group and kind of analyze these post-migrant activist identities in this region and how they continue their activism in host countries. As I mentioned that, that in 2020, Law and Justice government started to impose different kind of tribunal laws on reproductive rights, but also they wanted to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, and later on in 2021, Turkey also withdraw from the Istanbul Convention itself, which very much, like when you look into the research in this topic, that how the wave in Central Eastern European countries also affected the Turkey's decision of withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, how this kind of moral panic is created in different regions and affected populist leaders and narratives and rhetorics. So the main the framework is that that is very similar in Poland, and how is Poland and Turkey, how does it use that anti-gender politics, the thing that called gender ideology, is very much a war against the Polish traditional values and Polish families and children. So this idea of gender needs to be prevented, and there has been many discussions in Poland that this idea of gender is worse than communism itself. And similarly, that's like also in Kaczynski, previous Law and Justice leader, also talked about that, how homosexuality will lead to downfall of civilization in the rhetoric of anti-gender politics. And similarly, also we see in Turkey the same kind of rhetoric that is followed in terms of the family policies, that the anti-gender politics is against the Turkish Islamic values and the family and the religion. In Turkey cannot support this kind of idea of gender ideas, and also both regions, kind of Poland and Turkey, have this rhetoric of that this gender agenda and LGBT agenda is something Western, something that is coming from the Brussels itself, which in Poland we can see that some political leaders even named as gender as Ebola from Brussels, like Ebola virus from Brussels, which in 2025 in Turkey, we see that also this rhetoric still continue in Turkey with the declaration of family year and kind of promoting these ideas of that to protect the Turkish and Islamic values and kind of prevent this idea of gender ideas. So basically the research itself has been looking at this, that like after 2020, but also like before, starting from 2015, 2016, how that certain kind of feminist activists started to feel oppressed and decided to migrate or find themselves in exile from Poland and Turkey, and about their narratives and experiences. But also one of the most important things that I've been looking at, that how they are actually affecting these activist communities and activist practices in the host countries itself, and how this post-migrant studies also create a way of creating different kind of present-day organizing. for this, I'm using this concept of prefigurative politics to analyze of the feminist diasporic activism in host countries. That have actually that the activists are still feminist activists continue their activism, and they kind of embody this social and political values that they want to see in the future in present day organizing. That's which kind of moves to this point is that it's not only about the resistance against authoritarian regimes, but also kind of way of building new ways of living, new ways of imagining and creating communities in different contexts and different geographies, and kind of way of creating certain kind of plural, inclusive, post-patriarchal futures. And which very much in this research that I conducted, that the women staff, the feminist activists, all of them created certain kind of activist communities in the countries that they move. Especially, I interviewed that people who migrated to Germany, Belgium, Czech Republic, and Austria, which I conducted also other interviews, but all of them were mentioning about this sense of losing their political senselessness, and how their political subject, being a political subject, it feels different in a new country, in a new host country, and how they kind of feel distance to the activist communities and the political life that they moved into. But also this ruthlessness, this political ruthlessness doesn't stay as something that's as passive as a victimization, but as a consequence of it, they create different kinds of way of organizing and building communities in the host countries, and which very much during these focus groups, also interviews, but they have been like also pointing out that the importance of creating a politics of space rather than fitting into these conventional discourses. That this special displacement of political identity and political self is also, it brings certain kind of obstacles, but also brings certain kind of emotional solidarity in exile, in migration, that bring different groups of people, different groups of feminist activists and migrants together in order to create different kind of way of politics of space against the conventional discourses. And as I said, like, to kind of this importance of creating of feminist politics has been like very much prominent in the discussions of the groups, but also this new status of that is coming from being a feminist and woman and activist. It has been tripled with the migrant identity for this feminist diaspora activist that has been very also been emotional struggles to it. So that this was also kind of a sense of that of not feeling belong in this way, and this creating certain kind of feminist diaspora communities was way of them to kind of integrate themselves among the outside of these national discourses of the host societies. And they've been like talking about, maybe this visual was a bit, it might be disturbing, but it's not real blood. But the activist communities has been sharing with me different kind of visual protests they've been creating, different kind of performances in terms of to kind of draw attention in these diasporic spaces, but has been going on in their home countries. And they've been like mentioning that, yeah, thank you so much. They've been like mentioning about that, how this not only creating certain kind of communities, but organizing these protests, these performances in front of the embassy in Australia and Austria, and that's to kind of show to the world and show to Europe and to see that that how the violence itself and how the laws itself under gender politics itself is kind of create this violence, So they've been like talking about this way. This is how we kind of imagining and to staging our way of doing politics in diasporic spaces. Yeah, so the research is there's many things to talk about, but I don't have time. But basically, what I've been trying to do and the pointing out that's how we can create in this transnational feminist diaspora spaces a politics of possibility and a new way of being and relating. The migration itself that is coming from Edward Said's conceptualization of the diaspora and exile, that is not only something oppositional, but as something is generative and that is bringing new solidarities, defining new waves of belonging, and also to kind of move beyond these boundaries of normative citizenship frameworks and nation state frameworks, and to kind of see that activism is not purely resistance, but is a way of doing everyday practices and care and solidarity and creating this mutual support among certain kind of groups. So thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry, guys, I had a bit of some trouble putting my audio back on for some reason. Okay, very good. We are almost exactly on schedule. So now we will move on to the discussants feedback segment. And we can start with Dr. Gwenelle Bavois. Hopefully, I'm probably not pronouncing that right.
Beauvoir, yes, it's almost right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the boost of confidence.
Yeah.
Almost is good enough.
I've heard much worse, so you did very well.
I appreciate it. Okay, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So thanks for the invitation, first of all, and thanks for the 4 very interesting papers, and to the presenters. A pleasure to be here today. And I guess, like all of us today, I really think that this is a particularly timely session, because we are discussing democratic resilience at a moment when the rise of authoritarian forces are no longer confined to the margin of global politics. And today, democratic backsliding is not only associated with formerly authoritarian regimes, but increasingly within established and powerful democracies, including, of course, what we see at the moment in the United States. So this makes the question of resilience in general especially urgent, because it is no longer about protecting democracy elsewhere, but it's about also understanding how democracy is trained, reconfigured, and hollowed out from within. And I found this session particularly rich because, despite the very different empirical context, it really forces us to think carefully about what we actually mean when we talk about democratic resilience. And across market democracies, local institutions, revolutionary experiment, diasporic activism, resilience is not presented as a simple solution to democratic decline. Instead, it appears as something that is often quite ambivalent. Of course, it can protect democracy, but it can also normalize crises, reproduce inequality, as it has been showed very well, or shift the burdens of democracy onto specific groups. And what I really appreciate about this session is that resilience is treated not as a celebratory concept, but as a politically charged one. And this tension is, for me, one of the main contributions of this session. So let me start with Peter's paper first. So I found that the way you discuss resilience as a polysemic concept is extremely convincing, and it is really something that I'm really looking forward to read more and read your upcoming book, because it's really something I can really see using. That rather to try to pin down a simple definition, it really shows the multiplicity of meaning And what gives really resilience, this political power, is that it has this multiplicity of meanings. And a first question comes up is, how can we operationalize the concept of resilience without losing the richness of its polysemy? And I was particularly struck by the idea of resilience as an emergent institution of contemporary democracy. And I think it really deserves to be discussed and challenged, because this moves us beyond seeing resilience just as a response to crisis, and instead invites us to see it as something that increasingly structures democratic expectation and behavior from the citizen. And your approach is valuable because it discusses resilience in market democracy, and because it highlights that resilience is not neutral. It can transform democracy positively and also negatively. And I really appreciate that angle, depending on the context. And if resilience becomes an expectation rather than a choice, it risks becoming a way of asking citizens to endlessly adapt to crisis and be proactive, as you very well explained, rather than addressing the structural causes of democratic erosion. And the institutionalization of resilience that you highlight raises several critical questions. When a democracy is described as resilient, who is responsible for maintaining that resilience? The citizenry, the state, the elites, and how does this influence accountability? And could resilience be hijacked to claim that democracy is robust while citizens' rights and participation are actually eroding? So it raises a lot of questions. But to move to Pierre's paper, your paper really offers a very concrete and empirically grounded way of thinking through some of this tension when we discuss about resilience. And what I found especially strong is how clearly the paper shows the paradox at the heart of democratic training. What you are presenting in your example it is supposed to be a tool for re-enchanting local democracy, as you said. That's a very good term, and making political office accessible to everybody. But yet, at the same time, it reinforces the idea that politics requires specialized skills, and that only certain actors that possess certain skill and certain forms of capitals are entitled to acquire them. And in this sense, this kind of training becomes a form of resilience that stabilizes local institutions, but potentially at the cost of representativeness. And it really narrows the gap in competence, but widens the symbolic gap between elected official and ordinary citizen. So I think it was very like a specific example, as you said, because it is the context of France, which is also my country, as you might guess. But it can be applied to other examples, and it is really like a nice way to also reflect on what can also happen in other democracies. And the question I would raise here is, what would local democracy look like without such training? Would it be more chaotic or potentially more inclusive in the context of France, but also elsewhere? And are there alternative, more collective or open forms of political learning that could strengthen democracy without reinforcing political elitism? And to go to Soheila's paper, it really takes us in a very different context, but in doing so, it really productively unsettles many assumptions about democracy and resilience. And I think the Rojava is, if I'm pronouncing it well, probably not, is indeed a really fascinating example of civil society resilience. And what I find particularly important here is that the paper reframes resilience not as an institutional continuity, but as a collective survival and then feminist transformation under extreme condition. It really shows how democracy is lived through everyday practices rather than safeguarded by stable state structure. And I was really struck by the argument that Western democratic decline manifests itself through selective solidarity, supporting democratic values rhetorically, but abandoning the allies when they become inconvenient. And the paper raises very important and difficult questions. So what does this case tell us about the minimum condition for democracy? Can democratic practices and resilience emerge and persist without state sovereignty, security, or international recognition? And how should democratic theory account for resilience when inseparable from permanent geopolitical threat? And to conclude on Asian's paper, I think it really complements this discussion by shifting our attention to transnational and diasporic spaces. And I really enjoyed reading your full paper because I had the opportunity to read the full paper. And I think it's really well structured and clear with very interesting excerpts from your focus groups. And what I find most compelling is the way exile is framed not only as a loss, but as a site of political and democratic possibility that opens up new opportunities and challenging. And it's a way to challenge more negative vision of displacement. And I appreciate the future-oriented approach that is put forward in your paper. And here, resilience is not about preserving existing institutions, but recomposing political agency through care, solidarity, and prefigurative practices. But I have also noticed that there are several overlapping terms in your paper. You are using far-right, neo-fascist, conservative, right-wing, populist, far right-wing. So it might be useful to clarify how these categories relate to each other, or maybe have a more harmonized terminology that could really sharpen your argument. And one question I have concerns the relationship between feminist diaspora activism and other forms of political struggles in exile. So to what extent do the activists you study see their feminist engagement as intersecting with or opening spaces for other struggles such as labor rights, anti-racist mobilization, migrant rights, and so on? And where do you see the limits of feminist frames in building a wider coalition in this diasporic context? And do you see feminist diaspora activism as offering a model of resilience that offer political movement in exile, and what they might learn from this model of resilience? And I can see I have 1 minute left, so I had to just to conclude, I want to raise maybe 3 broader questions that emerge across all 4 papers. They're really big questions, but we can just reflect on them. So first, is resilience always democratic? And across the panel, we can see that sometimes it, of course, enables democratic renewal, but sometimes compensates for democratic erosion without addressing its causes. So how do we analytically distinguish democratic resilience from mere system survival? And second, who bears the cost of resilience? It often relies on the labor of women, activists, local grassroots actors. And this suggests, as it has been done, that resilience itself should be treated as a site of power, inequality, and political struggle. And finally, is resilience ultimately conservative or transformative? Does it mainly help democracies endure under adverse conditions, or can it open pathways towards fundamentally different kind of democratic futures? And I will stop here, leave the room for the next discussion, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clear. Now we can move on to Dr. Bayari Toscano's feedback, please.
Hello, can you hear me well? Okay, so thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for the first discussant, Gainel. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing well, but it was incredible because I have like a lot of mm, similar notes for each discussant. So yeah, I think that this panel is extremely useful and can give us some practical analysis, and also in this moment kind of crazy Trumpism around the world, like uh, speaking about coup d'etats in Venezuela, Greenland, and wherever. So I think that we are in a special moment, and in this specific step of yeah, this kind of cannibalism that we can find, and is part of this populist moment. So I think it's very useful. Thank you so much for the organizers and the speakers. So I think that the four papers in the season converge on this concern, right? So how democratic practices, institutions, movements hold up, adapt, and are reinvented under authoritarian pressure. So I will offer a short shared frame, then a brief comment on each paper with one guiding question, and I will close with one question for the whole panel. So let me check my notes here that I was preparing. I think that like across the panel, resilience, as the first discussant was also speaking, is not only about endurance. It is also about how democracy manages time, legitimacy, and hope when authoritarian pressures rises. Authoritarian and populist politics often sell speed and simplicity. They promise quick decisions, they present procedure as weaknesses, and they treat checks and balances as obstacles. So democracy, by contrast, moves through slower rhythms, debate, accountability, and the time it takes for policy to change everyday conditions. So this gap matters politically because leaders often fear the charisma cost of saying openly, this will take time. Um, Instead, they keep attention through permanent crisis, and that is why I was speaking about this step that Trumpism as a political phenomena is living now, right? So yeah, this is a visible example, a kind of Trump-style politics, especially at its most conflict-driven moments. So when many voters do not feel domestic improvements, political energy can shift towards border emergencies, external threats, as we were saying, or international escalation. So the news cycle becomes a sequence of shocks. It is not only about policy outcomes, it also sustains emotional intensity and postpones disappointment. So resilience is also tied to the future. Many people now attach hope to techno-utopian promises, innovation, AI, growth, prosperity, just around the corner, these kind of promises. This hope can be especially strong among popular classes facing insecure work, high rent, and weak public services. I think that when democratic projects cannot translate future talk into tangible improvements, frustration growth and authoritarian shortcuts can start to look effective. So finally, as the first part of general notes, resilience is shaped by global power and by what we could call colonial conditions of meaning. in fragmented institutions, like we can check, for example, in Latin America. And I was looking a lot in the case of Venezuela last weeks. Specific cracks open up where policy becomes more vertical and hierarchical, and citizens experience government as something done to them rather than built with them, right? So let me, with that frame, turn to the papers. The first paper from Peters offers a strong way to think about resilience as polysemic, as the first discussion was explaining. Also, it has like many meanings that cannot be reduced to one. Peter also argued that resilience is becoming an emergent institution in contemporary democracy. So I find this very useful because it shows how resilience can move from description into expectation and then into a political norm. So, like in market democracies, the term that you develop, resilience can become a demand placed on citizens and institutions, adapt, cope, stay flexible. The risk is that this language hides structural insecurity and turns resilience into a moral obligation. So I think that people are asked to endure precarious work, high living cost, and weakened welfare, while the system calls that endurance strength. So here, I think that the urgency logic matters again. So conflict-driven populism often keeps the country in a permanent edge of crisis mood, right? So this performance can cover the absence of material improvements, and it can make slow democratic governance look like failure. So in that context, resilience can slide into managed survival rather than democratic transformation. So just one guiding question will be like, in your framework, what are the clearest indicators that resilience is becoming transformative and political, rather than institutionalize it as a way to normalize precarity and lower expectations? That will be like the question that I was thinking about reading your work and listening you. Speaking about the second paper from Pierre Camus, I think that you present a clear paradox. Like training is presented as a way to open politics and renew local democracy, but it can also increase specialization and widen the distance between elected officials and citizens. I will connect this to a Bonapartist tendency. That's something that I have worked a lot in contemporary politics. Understanding this as a shift in legitimacy towards competence, executive know-how, and administrative mastery. So I think that training can unintentionally send the message that politics is a technical job and that representation depends on certified skills. So this is also related and links to colonial conditions of meaning. As I was speaking before, in fragmented institutions, professionalization often comes with a vertical style of administration, like policy moves downward, citizens become clients, and participation becomes symbolic rather than real. So even reforms meant to improve democracy can create institutional cracks where resentment accumulates. I will do like a more practical question to you, Pierre. It will be about what training designs could build competence while also building democratic closeness. Let me speak about the third paper. So Hela, I think that you shift the perspective in an essential way. You show resilience as the everyday production of democratic life under extreme violence and abandonment. So Rojava is not about protecting a stable liberal system, it's about building democracy from below through communes, councils, women's organizations, social infrastructures, while facing war, invasion, embargo, and humanitarian pressure. So I think that here the geopolitical point is also crucial. Democratic decline is not only internal to democracies, it is also visible in how democracies act internationally. So Western states can call Rojava an ally against ISIS and still abandon it when strategic costs rise. So this is a hard lesson, right? Like vulnerable democratic projects are asked to endure, while powerful actors keep the option to disengage. So my question will be, what concrete forms of supports and responsibility you think that are necessary for resilience to sustain democratic life over time? And I will be fast with the last paper, as I just have 1 minute. Maybe, sorry about this, I will be like 1 minute more, but will be just this. So I think that if STEM, you show resilience in another K form, like a transnational feminist activist shaped by exile and diaspora. I actually love it how you explain this, like also from Zapatismo and how you expose it this to explain this transnational ethos and nature. So here, resilience is not only resistance against repression back home, so it is also the creation of solidarities, care infrastructures, and political practices in host societies that may be supportive in some ways and restrictive in others. So this case also raises questions about infrastructure, because diaspora activists relies heavily on digital platforms, right? So platforms can amplify some narratives and bury others. So they can also generate risks, including harassment, doxing, surveillance, and transnational repression. So in practice, activists often face constant trade-offs between visibility and safety. So my guiding question for this paper will be like, more, I was curious also about your interviews. What most helps activists sustain solidarity over time in exile, like formal organizations, informal networks, care practices, or specific tactics? I would love to listen more about these methodological results. And just to conclude, across your four cases, democratic resilience, as we were speaking, can mean very different things under authoritarian pressure. Like sometimes it protects democratic practices, but sometimes it also normalizes emergency politics, hierarchy, or mere survival. So in your case, where is the line, and that's the general question, between resilience as democratic persistence and resilience as a kind of adaptation that quietly changes democracy itself? I mean, like, what is the first sign that resilience is sliding into accommodation, and what conditions help democratic actors resist that slide? I think that question will help us also to organize the discussion. So thank you so much, and sorry about the time.
Okay, very positive exchanges so far. Okay, so now we will directly move on to the questions from all participants. I suppose that if you use the emoji reaction button that you see below on Zoom Workplace, if you raise your hand, I can immediately identify you, and then you'll have a chance to ask your question. Any questions? Okay, I see. Fatima, Zara, you can ask your question whenever you're ready. Then Bulent.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Thank you all. Thank you for all the insightful presentation. Actually, as someone with the background in gender studies, I got a master in the gender studies, and I'm interested about the presentation. Presented by Miss Sharahaya. I don't know if I pronounced it right.
Can you please repeat that?
I have a comment and a question to Mrs. Shahriyari. Yeah, Shahriyari.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So what actually struck me is how like Rojava shows a form of democracy that goes beyond the state and puts women in collective decision making at the center. And the same here in Morocco, we also talk a lot about democracy reforms and women's rights, but these discussions actually it's usually stay within the framework like of the state and institutions. As Rojava made me reflect on how limited our imaginations of democracy can be when it is tied only to state authority and the international approval. So my question is that for you, Mas, do you think that that the experiments like Rojava are marginalized mainly because they challenge the authoritarianism, or because they challenge the state-centered idea of democracy itself? And in your view, is it possible for such feminist and horizontal models to exist in more stable state contexts like Morocco without being seen as a threat? And thank you.
Thank you for your question. Okay, you can. So it was directed to Dr. Shairari, of course. You can.
So I can respond, or I have to wait until the end of all questions? I can respond.
I believe you can respond right away. Am I correct, Bulent?
Actually, at the end of the session,
Okay. I apologize.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No
Okay,
problem.
so in that case, then we'll move on to the next question, right? From Bulent.
Yeah, actually, I wonder about the state capitalism issue. My question is to Dr. Peter Rogers. He talked about this resilience in market democracy, but the global arena is also a market for political systems. And recently, the market economy, the problems, especially the problems of distribution in liberal market economy is abused by far right and the populist far right and extreme right, even though some leftist populist actors and parties. So my question is that recently I frequently hear about this state capitalism. I wonder whether in this global market of political systems, the state capitalism could be a remedy for democratic deficit or democratic backsliding. Of course, I don't believe in that, but I wonder what kind of arguments could be used against this state capitalism, especially it had been it is successful during the COVID period in China. I mean China and some other countries imitating China's system. So what the dangers awaiting us from this perspective, promoting state capitalism? Thank you very much.
Okay, I think the question was clear. Any more questions? I don't see any hands up at the moment. No more questions? Okay, then we can move on to the responses by the presenters. We can start with the question that was asked by Fatima and the response by Dr. Shairadi.
Okay, thank you so much for this question. And I think, as I said in my presentation, Rojava is a feminist radical democracy, which emerged in the context of the collapse of the state in Syria. And this, in this vacuum of power, we see that Rojava emerged not just as an ad hoc formation or establishment, but rather is based on democratic confederalism, which, as I said again, theorized by the Abdullah Öcalan, the leader of the PKK, for 4 decades we have this theorization of this ideology, and it has been practiced throughout the 4 decades. And so here we are facing a feminist radical entity in Rojava, which is institutional since 2012. Which is a form of bottom-up democracy with respect for pluralism and ecological principles and gender equality. But Rojava is not just about this. Rojava it goes beyond all of this. It's a model of the governance which contrasts with the actually nation-state system. Because as we know, in international relations, the unit of analysis of is a nation-state. So Rojava as a non-state actor, democratic non-state actor, appears in this international scene, and in this international relations. It doesn't make sense for the nation states, this radical democracy. That is why we see that during the Battle of Kobane, during the rise of IS and Islamist fundamentalism in Syria and Iraq, we see that the Western countries applauded the Rojava's combatant, especially the Kurdish women fighters during the Battle of Kobane. And they got the international media's attention. And I remember very well at those days, Kurdish women fighters in Rojava, in international press, they were presented as freedom fighters and so on and so forth. But now that the threat of IS is a kind of faded away, we see that these women became like mercenaries, or they abandoned by the Western's allies. This is happening quite seriously in the Turkish invasion. We see this example in the Turkish invasion of Rojava in 2018 and 2019, which was going on under the callousness, indifference of Western countries. And this is kind of these days since December 2025, and the moment that I speak with you, this tension is going on right now in a other form between the transitional government of Ahmed al-Shar'a in Syria, and which backed by the Turkey to invade the Kurdish-led SDF territory, and this is going on just right now under the international eyes, and without any kind of reaction to this. And unfortunately, I said, I will repeat that unfortunately, in an international relations, the unit of analysis is nation state, and the actors, the non-state actors like Rojava, that they actually they represent a radical democracy in this era of the decline of democracy. They cannot be they don't have support of the international communities, but just in the moment of the strategic alliances they have some support, and these days we see that unfortunately the landscape is so bleak, and there is no support for Rojava. There is no support for this feminist entity in Rojava. As I said, because of the authoritarianism in the region and the decline of democracy as well, and actually this problem inside the international relations, which is state-centric. So, as I said, the landscape is so bleak. Just to conclude the other questions from the Gwenel, if I pronounce it well, who shoulders this resilience. In my case of study, Rojava, unfortunately, the civil society and women and feminists in Rojava and internationalists that they are engaged there, they shoulder this resilience, and it's transformative. But when we see there is no balance of power there. There is no balance of power statistically or militarily. Unfortunately, the situation is so dire, and I don't think so that Rojava has lots of choices and options right now. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So very good. Bulent's question. If Dr. Rogers would like to respond, you can.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you to the discussants. I'd love to be able to address all of the things that were in that, but drop me a line. Those are discussions I want to have. Please do. But I'll try and be brief. It is 3 a.m. here in Sydney, so I'll try and do it in a focused way. So Bulent. Great question, and it's one of the big ones, right? I've got this feeling now, and I'm sure you all, like I have been watching the World Economic Forum, and some of the discussions there have really, perhaps inspired me to think about this in a slightly less defeatist way than I had previously. But I do suspect we're entering an era of political realism and political pragmatism. And state capitalism as a remedy for democratic difficulties is something that we used to relegate to Gibsonian dark futures, to, the Running Man, to all of this kind of stuff. But I mean, Mr. Big is literally doing The Running Man on Netflix right now. So it's not as far away as we think. Moving the burden of resilience to individuals has created emergent markets. It's created disaster capitalism, and they're already exploiting that in those systems. So in some ways, we're seeing market forces take on aspects of state-based protections already as a way of exploiting them for profit. That's already happening. I think pretending that it isn't, and that's not an example of the way that states are shedding responsibilities to markets, is perhaps a little unrealistic for us. So we're already seeing it happen. And to some extent, philanthropy is already doing this as well. Around the world, we are seeing less and less state investment in resilience because that money is going into security. And we're seeing more and more private investment in resilience from independent think tanks, from philanthropic funding, from crowdsourced funding. And when we look at community and when we talk about collective investments in resilience, perhaps That's my favorite moment from the World Economic Forum so far, was Canadian President making that moment where he said collective investments in resilience are better at building security than improving your own fortress. And that is the shift in thinking that we need to see to be able to redefine what a good return on investment in resilience building actually means. And this is not necessarily, I mean, when I was in Qatar a couple of years ago, the discussion wasn't about finding climate change projects that will help solve the problem. It was about finding projects that were fundable at a sufficient return of investment for the venture capitalists. And it was the problem that the venture projects are giving a return of less than 10%, and a 30 to 40% return on investment was required to attract venture capital. And so the pragmatic realism of how projects get funded and which projects are successful is already shifting. So we need to keep track of how we measure success, because the measurement protocol for how we measure a successful return on investment, it needs to be more than fiscal. It needs to be moral. And that is a gap in our political pragmatism that we haven't filled yet. So for me, this is why when I talk about this, the distinction of citizen responsibilities and citizen expectations, that we can realistically ask the state to protect us in certain ways. Well, the welfare state's almost gone. In 50 years, there won't be pensions. We're already seeing healthcare decay around the world. We're going in the wrong direction because socialism doesn't bind us the way it used to. We don't have collective solidarity. We have individual solidarity that can be mobilized when certain things go wrong. So how do we enhance that connectivity, the social fabric, the social tissue? That's why projects that are looking at social capital building are becoming really, really popular now, because social capital is a measurable indicator of where the investment gives you a return in a language that government and policymakers can understand, because it's measurable. You can show a return on investment. There has been an improvement in connectivity by measuring social capital. Keep your eye on the measurements, and you'll start to see how people define outcomes. And so I guess I'm going on a little bit, but the language does hide security. It does turn resilience into a moral obligation. But is there an argument to be made that perhaps citizens have become so lazy, particularly in the West, that we're not actually fulfilling our role as active members of the body politic? We have to take personal responsibility for shaping our government, for shaping our values. And populism drives them in certain ways. We have to drive them back. And that is an individual responsibility that fuels the collective. And we see that in the case studies of the activists that the other speakers were talking about. So there isn't any one resilience. And I guess, Gunnar, just really briefly, knowing that and appreciating that, I love that the polysemic approach has been responded to so well here, because I guarantee you I get a very different response when I'm in a room of military intelligence people, or I'm speaking at the Australian Emergency Management Conference to blue light responders. They don't care. To them, it's about how to get wet stuff on the hot stuff and save lives. So we all have to build a common language, and appreciating which resilience the people we're talking to care about is essential if we're going to stay relevant to the discussions that experts have. And I think overall, I mean, I could keep going, but I shouldn't. So thank you all very much for your comments, and please do reach out to me to continue the conversation.
Okay. Okay, then. I'm just going to say a few words. I mean, very good. As we have reached the end of this session, I would like to express my satisfaction with the yeah.
Amedeo, maybe you can give a chance for other presenters to respond,
Oh, okay.
discussants and some comments.
Okay,
If
okay.
you wish.
I'm sorry. I just didn't want to go over time, so I just wanted to stick to the schedule. Okay. Does anyone else want to say something?
Yes, maybe I will be quick if you would like. Yes?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the question, Gwenaël, because it's a very important question. Because in a French case, if we look back historically, the training of elected local was largely provided by political parties, especially by socialist and revolutionary socialist parties. And these parties played a key role in socializing activists and future elected officials to political skills, ideology, and practical knowledge of government. But however, the right to training is now largely left to individual initiative. In practice, access depends on personal resources, time availability, employer support, and institutional position. And as a result, training tends to reproduce social and political inequalities rather than reduce them. I guess you will understand me the first time, but this situation reflects a deeper democratic tension between competence and citizenship, because citizenship is supposed to be a sufficient condition for political participation. Training remains politically sensitive. Local authorities, therefore, tend to remain largely passive, paying limited attention to how training rights are actually implemented and who benefits from them. This lack of regulation allows existing social inequalities to persist, particularly for elected officials from working class backgrounds and small municipalities, and those whose employers make it difficult to take time off for training. And from this perspective, it's absolutely clear that the current right of training is far better than having no training framework at all. But I think that training should be mandatory. In particular, there should be stronger obligation on employers to allow elected officials to make time for training. Without such constraint, the formal right to training remains largely symbolic and continues to favor those who are already the most privileged and within the local institution. And I will respond to the question from Gabriel. Thank you also. But on the question of what training design could build competence while also building democratic closeness, I would like to answer with one interesting example of the state of Victoria in Australia. Maybe Peter Roger knows it, where training is organized in 3 stages. Mandatory training for candidates before nomination, compulsory induction for newly elected officials, and ongoing training during the mandate. And this design is important because it helps to de-enclave training. By moving parts of the training upstream to candidates, basic democratic and institutional knowledge circulates more widely before electoral selection. This reduces the tension between competence and citizenship, because the competence is no longer produced only within closed space reserved for elected officials. And such a model suggests that training can build competence while also strengthening the democratic closeness, providing it is designed a collective and open process rather than an exclusive and professional resources. But in the French case, however, such a model is not really conceivable, because making training a condition for candidacy will be seen as an introducing a barrier to political participation and will be considered illegitimate. The resistance is directly linked to a strong fear of over-professionalization of elected officials, and to the idea that citizenship alone should remain sufficient to stand for office. Thank you very much.
Okay. Does anyone else want to say a few words?
I can also I don't want to hold anyone. I'm the last one, but I can just answer maybe just the questions and just put the end on it, to kind of sum it up. That's the questions. Thank you for the feedbacks and for the discussions questions. I really appreciate it. And for this interesting discussion is that I think what the Dr. Rogers were talking about, this collective solidarity is very much related to what I've been also talking about, is that, and it was related to questions why Gwenaël also, that what is the limits of these coalitions, what's how we can create these tolerators, but what are their limits also. And I took kind of a way of changing like this idea of there's a linear process like of resilience also, like a linear process of resistance and that we will kind of reach to this long-term like a salvation and long-term resistance of it. But actually what this activist is trying to do, these communities in different kind of settings, is that that they are very much aware of this temporality of these solidarities and the collectives, whether they are event-based, whether they are like very short-lived, but the main point is kind of create these ruptures within the system itself, and the kind of way of like as we talk about the morals, you know, like kind of relating to different kind of morals, different ways of thinking and the relation, and kind of finding these spaces. Oh, actually, there's other people and spaces that thinking as same as me, and kind of we can create this space. It doesn't need to be like long-lived, but it can be also short-lived, and very much kind of just like kind of have this like this short effect of it, but also kind of create these ruptures of it, which also Gabrielle was asking about different kind of tactics, which I will finalize with this, is that like how they kind of do this, that it's very, very different ways of like they doing it, like they create this, like in also with the governor's questions of it that also kind of intersect in different activist communities and other issues, which is whether other political issues, workers' rights or political rights, or migrant rights. They create and invite other groups and others. People, they create, like, for example, one activist group kind of created these listening spaces where they just like go and listen a certain kind of music, and then people like gather there and listening certain kind of protest music and just stay there and kind of embed this space. So it's like very kind of creative ways of doing it, or whether they just kind of in a very grassroots level, they just like support the migrants, you know, migrant women, whether they are coming from Poland, Iran, or another country, but they kind of like have this very much like like a hand-on solidarity that they're creating in this way, and also through the digital spaces, which plays a big role. But I will end it here, and I would like to continue discussions. Maybe we can exchange emails and talk about it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. As we have reached the end of this session 10, I would like to express my satisfaction with the intellectual. Yes.
Sorry. Just I have one thing. I'll be very, very quick.
Okay.
If I can.
Respond
to if I can respond to the question of Gabriel. So Gabriel asked the question generally, but I will try to respond to the question: what concrete action we can do in supporting democratic entities, like, for example, in my case studies, Rojava. I want to ask this question. I want to answer this question with a question. So I think with what's going on the ground in Rojava right now, that the death toll is so high, the tension between SDF and democratic forces in Syria and the Islamist central forces, the tension is so high, and the support for the Arab Syrian army is so high, and I said this is going on under the very eyes of the international communities, especially United States and other Western countries. It's up the concrete action that we can make. It's like a sign of some petitions and or put pressure on the lawmakers in order not to defend, for example, the president of so-called president of Syria with the crystal clear background of Al-Qaeda background. But my question is, it is kind of enough, and I will leave this discussion open and with this question: is it this enough for stopping the war and the death toll and the continuation of the war in Rojava? Thank you so much.
Okay. At this point, I suppose that I will move on to the conclusive segment. As we have reached the end of this session 10, I would like to express my satisfaction with the intellectual quality, effort, and scientific rigor and methodological precision I have come across today. All of the presentations were certainly very enthralling. A big thank you to the discussants, Dr. Beauvoir and Dr. Bayari Toscano, and to the presenters, Dr. Rogers, Dr. Camus, Dr. Shairari, and SM. Best of luck, SM, with the continuation of your PhD. All of these presentations, in one way or the other, undeniably contributed to the academic literature and were also very interesting. I think in the last couple of hours were very refreshing, because now we all possibly have a better idea of what is occurring in different countries and contexts in relation to democratic resilience and responses to authoritarian drifts and authoritarian politics, not just in formal political circles or structures, but also in everyday life, democratic resilience through spontaneous activism and gatherings. Thank you again. I will leave it up to Reka, Koleszar, now to put forward to wrap it up with a conclusive statement.
Yes, thank you. In the name of ECPS, I would like to thank our distinguished presenters for your insightful and thought-provoking contributions. And I would also like to express my gratitude to our exceptional moderator and our discussants for the precise and illuminating assessments. We warmly invite you to join for the next ECPS virtual workshop session on the 5th of February, so in 2 weeks, where the session will explore inclusion or illusion, narratives of belonging, trust, and democracy in a polarized era. We encourage everyone to register and take part in this important conversation. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day.